My name is Lori Grace. I'm the Executive Director of the Sunrise Center. I'm so happy to see all of you here. And I've been involved with election integrity issues since 2003, when I learned that the Bush-Gore campaign had been, the election had been actually stolen, and I was approached by two filmmakers who started a film called Hacking Democracy, which and then worked with Beverly Harris. And then it went on from there, and it's 2016 now, and I see a lot of my friends who we've worked on election integrity for so many years together, and I want to definitely have you stand up for a moment for the rest of the group. But first of all, I want to say I am so pleased and honored to have both Bob Fitztracus and Cliff Arnabeck here. And we have, we're going to go over a little bit of the history of election manipulation in the United States, and also look at what's happening now. But first, for a moment, because there's such a famous cast of characters here, I'd like to have a few of you stand up. So Richard Tam and Don Goldbacker and Jim Soper and Carl Carter, you're all part of the Voter Rights Task Force, always looking at ways to create more voter integrity within California primarily, but have also consulted on bigger presidential things. And Danny Sheehan here, come stand up. And then my latest person I've met, Stephen Jaffe. And he's working on election integrity on behalf of the Bernie campaign. So we have so many different wonderful things, and what's excited me about this election, and personally, and I speak personally, I really enjoyed the populist agenda of the Bernie campaign, and Bernie, and when I met with, first of all, Charles Chamberlain of the DFA and others, I began to see that there was some openness to recognizing that elections could be manipulated, which was so exciting because we'd never had that in a presidential campaign before. And then now some very are making a lot of people upset, and we need to take some steps in this primary itself, or we could possibly have a debacle. So we're working hard on it every day. So with that, we were going to show you a few little YouTubes, and being that we want to be in dynamic connection with you as the audience. If you're eager to move on, we want to show you a little bit about what's happened in our country. How many of you here have follow issues around election integrity all day long, every day? No, how many? Some of you do, I know. All right? Okay, all right, so I am seeing that I am not going to be presenting to the choir. There are people who really could use a little education on this, and I'm happy for it, okay? So with that, I'd like to show you a video of a man that I introduced in 2008 at the ACLU National Convention to a Republican whistleblower who has a lot to do with why Obama got elected in 2008. And you're going to learn that actually he wouldn't have been elected if it wasn't for him.
I'm a Republican. I worked on Giuliani's campaign. I worked on Bloomberg's campaign. I worked on John McCain's campaign. I've been a lifelong member of the party. This is not a Democrat-Republican issue. This is not a partisan issue. This is a democracy issue. If you actually care about a constitutional democracy in which each person votes, that vote is validated, and the people who end up in office are reflected on the basis of the way people voted, you care about this issue. If you don't want people to vote, if you don't want people's vote to count, and if you want to rule without owning it by a mandate, then you are very supportive of Diebold.
Well, Wally Odell has promised in an old fundraising letter to deliver.
I'm going to go ahead and accept.
Is it a Republican issue? I mean, who's stealing the votes? If what you say is true, who wants to steal the elections?
I certainly know that in all the statistical information, it seems that in every single bizarre circumstance where exit data, polling data, or informational data swings, it has all been in favor of Republicans, but not the sort of Republicans who I want to see in office at all. These are people who lie and people who cheat. That is not the conservative way. Conservatives conserve things. We are respectful and we are constitutionally based. You know what the real problem is? People do not want to believe that people want to steal elections in this country. I've done extensive work over the years for voting monitoring overseas. If we had a variance in the exit polling of even 2% from what actually was tabulated, which is exactly how the Orange Revolution came about in Ukraine, we would be in there explaining to people something is wrong. We have had numerous elections in this country now in which where you use Diebold election system machines, what happens with the vote is way off, 5, 10, as much as 12% from the exit polling and the actual survey. These statistical numbers are impossible. And the problem is Americans do not want to believe that we have people stealing our elections, and they must come to the realization there are people in this country who want to steal elections, and we must stop them.
Our next little video is just introducing you to some of the issues around voting machines, and if it goes too long, we'll switch and we'll go to the next thing, which is a man named Clint Curtis, who was selected to design a vote flipping mechanism. But we'll run this for a little bit.
The United States of America, a beacon of democracy. Well, it was at one point at least. Now elections are full of fraud and burglary. From party delegates to voting machines to the Electoral College, elections have become a corrupted, convoluted system that's in dire need of repair. So to talk more about this broken system and why the media won't touch the issue of rigged elections, I'm joined now by New York University professor and author of the book Fooled Again, The Real Case for Electoral Reform, Mark Crispin Miller. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Well, thank you for having me on, Abby.
So with the elections coming up in less than a month, I wanted to dig right into election fraud, which you've covered extensively through your research. You said that the Republican establishment media doesn't address the issue, but that the alternative media goes out of their way to debunk the issue of rigged elections. So why is this such a taboo issue across the board?
Well, I don't know. That's a very, very good question. In a way, that's the question. Why does the press, including the progressive media, consistently either ignore or debunk very solidly based arguments and even observations about stolen elections? Why does the Democratic Party also refuse to discuss the issue, even though they're the ones who are getting screwed by this? I don't know. We could speculate about it. It's probably something we should discuss on a whole separate segment. But the fact is that it is a taboo subject, despite a massive amount of very, very precise evidence making quite clear that our elections have been stolen, mostly by the Republican Party, since 2000, through a combination of vote suppression, which is disenfranchising people before Election Day, and then election fraud through electronic means, which is something actually new in the history of election chicanery in the United States.
So you just mentioned, it's mostly the Republican establishment kind of rigging these elections. But I mean, I remember in 2004, the exit polls flipping after Bush winning. Kerry said, we'd have lawyers on the ground in Ohio, we'd count every vote. And then he gives this concession speech. And you said yourself, Kerry acknowledged that the election was stolen. So why, Mark, why did Kerry take a dive, Gore take a dive? I mean, they want to win, right? I mean, they're putting billions of dollars into these campaigns. Doesn't this suggest that they're complicit in this establishment line as well? In the charade?
In a way, they're complicit. But I think in the case of Gore and Kerry, their complicity is a matter of a certain kind of establishmentarian mindset, We have heard that Gore had a conversation with Jesse Jackson about the question of whether or not the 2000 election had been stolen, and he is reported to have said to Jackson, well, if this is all true and if it was stolen, there's really no alternative to revolution. Well, I don't think Al Gore is a revolutionary. Neither is John Kerry. I mean, he's, you know, got more money than God thanks to his marriage. These guys are seasoned inside players in D.C., so that when they're confronted with evidence of something as profoundly scandalous and really disorienting as the subversion of the election system, I think they can't go there. They're simply not able to go there. Now there are Democrats who are clearly complicit, because the big, huge private companies that own and maintain the electronic voting system spread their money around, you know, to members of both parties. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all explanation for this silence, you know, whether that's just psychological denial, whether it's complicity, whatever it is. I think we have to agree, you know, that the election system, at the very least, needs to be radically reformed in a kind of revolutionary way, if only because there's no doubt that the election system could be subverted. Our elections could be rigged, and on this, nobody disagrees. We've had studies from, you know, a whole range of universities, from the government itself. Pretty much everybody agrees that our computerized election system is very, very easy to manipulate, extremely easy to manipulate. Where it gets to the point where folks don't want to talk about it is when you come up with evidence that it has been used to manipulate elections and is being used to manipulate elections. At that point, people accuse you of conspiracy theory and change the subject. And they will talk about vote suppression, voter ID requirements, and things like that. They will talk about Citizens United. They'll talk about the floods of campaign contributions that are being used to, you know, sort of wash away any kind of rational political discourse. These are important subjects, don't get me wrong, but to talk only about them and to ignore the facts of electronic election fraud is to leave us extremely vulnerable as a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the elephant in the room, Mark. Like you just said, we talk about all the things that have to do with elections, the mainstream media 24/7, this whole charade and the scripted conventions and the debates. And all the while, I mean, the system's rigged from the top down. I wanted to talk about just the corporate-backed establishment candidates, the corporate-controlled media disseminating the message and marginalizing alternatives, to the ballot boxes, to the voting machines, and then to the Electoral College itself. I mean, what do you think about having a system in place, rigged voting aside, rigged electronic machines aside, that you can win a popular vote but lose the election with the Electoral College? What do you think about just that?
Well, look, I mean, if you look back at the history of elections in the United States, you can see that from the beginning, there's been a strong animus against the enfranchisement of the people. You know, I mean, we call ourselves a democracy, but we've become a democracy really in spite of the preferences of the founding fathers. The Electoral College is one of many ways in which the system has been rigged against popular self-government. That's a fact. And it's also true that there are way too many profound similarities between the two political parties. That's all true. However, I think we have to understand that the Republican Party today is basically in the hands of an extremely radical minority of very, very wealthy people who are mostly radical libertarians, and that there's also a considerable component of theocratic Christianists who, frighteningly enough, have their hands on the very few huge private companies that manufacture and maintain our voting system. I mean, I could get into details about this. Let me make the general point that when you start to realize that there is a kind of extremist faction that has a lot of influence on the outcome of our elections, you realize that it's not necessarily helpful simply to emphasize the deep similarity between the two political parties. That is a fact. They are all too similar. But we're also talking about something else.
Sure.
There are differences. There are differences between the parties. If, for example, Al Gore had been allowed to serve as president, and by the way, most Americans don't know that he actually won the election in 2000, when all the votes in Florida were finally counted, and the results were announced 2 months after 2 months after 9/11, it came out that Gore had actually won by just a few hundred votes. I mean, despite all the vote suppression and the rigging, he actually won. Now, if he'd been allowed to serve, you know, I really strongly doubt we would have gone and invaded Iraq. I also strongly doubt that we would have ignored global warming, you know. So those are just a couple of significant differences.
Sure, but Mark, who can we blame? Anyone but these people who concede and take a dive after they win. I mean, if they're spineless, I just don't understand. I mean, yes, of course, there are significant differences domestically, you know, but I mean, yes, the Republicans may have hijacked this whole rigged system of elections, but I mean, geez, I really can't blame anyone else but the people who are letting it happen that have no spine.
Well, I completely agree with you there, Abby. I'm not going to argue with that. I mean, the people who roll over for that extremist faction are just as much to blame as the faction itself. I blame Obama for not prosecuting Bush Cheney for war crimes, right? I mean, we could go down that road, and we go down hand in hand, because I completely agree with you. And let's not stop there in assigning blame, okay? Let's notice too that, again, the press, that the corporate press, the New York Times and the rest of them, and most of the progressive media are equally to blame for treating this whole subject as conspiracy theory, you know, despite the fact that there is no end of evidence that this has been going on. Let me give you just one example out of many, and it's a pretty harrowing story. You know, the re-election victory of Bush Cheney in Ohio was arranged primarily by a man named Mike Connell, who was Karl Rove's IT guru, very conservative, an extremely conservative Catholic, who did what he did primarily because he wanted to, in his words, save the babies. I mean, he was a radical anti-abortion activist, also kind of a computer genius. Now, he actually set up a computer architecture for use in the 2004 election that involved, well, it's a system called man in the middle, and it's used by criminals often to, you know, steal cash from financial institutions and so on. What he did was he set up a mirror site, run through a computer in a basement in Chattanooga that allowed outside actors to actually manipulate the vote count in Ohio. This is a fact, and the reason I say it with such assurance is that the contract that Mike Connell signed with Secretary of State Ken Blackwell is publicly available, and in fact it's on my blog, News from Underground. So if people just go to markcrispinmiller.com, they can read the contract that someone provided, and see for themselves that this mirror site was set up, and as computer expert Stephen Spoonamore has said, a Republican by the way, that there is no other purpose to build such a site than to steal an election. Well, and you get into the details of what happened in Ohio on that night, you realize that the exit polls had it right. John Kerry won that election, and let me simply agree with you again that Kerry is to blame for rolling over. Also, his campaign actually banked millions of dollars to use in the event that the election was stolen. And not only has Kerry never addressed this publicly, and I'm not the only person he told privately he thought it was stolen, but they never spent a dime of that money in helping to expose that particular crime, which is necessary in order to get the American people to see that we have to do something about our election system. We have to get rid of computerized voting. We have to get rid of computerized vote counting across the board, period.
Okay, so Clint Curtis is a programmer who was solicited by some Republicans, he was a Republican, to try to create what he thought was a program to unflip the Democratic flip. That's how it was approached. Yeah, they assumed that the Democrats would flip the vote, so they were going to unflip it. Okay, and they also no, not quite yet, Sam. They also wanted to hide it, and just to say, this is the actual lawsuit was presented, or the testimony, I guess. Testimony? Okay.
That was testimony before a group of House judiciary folks.
Okay, why'd you come
and
up to...
And some Ohio legislators as well. Just the day we filed the contest in the Ohio Supreme Court to the 2004 presidential election.
I do want to let you know that when all of this came out, there was a detective who was following Clint Curtis around. Clint Curtis's favorite dog that he had lived with for many years was shot, and then the detective was found dead. His name was Lemmy, with a, quote, suicide, and a scrolled note to his wife in handwriting that could not be recognized, with, and he had strangle marks on his throat, but they didn't take any of the, and I think he had more than one bullet, if I recall. Anyway, the police took pictures of it. They wouldn't let anybody see them, including the family. And later it all came out. But the process of dealing with elections in our country can be very dangerous. And we're going to go into that. But first, Cliff, why don't you come up, since you were involved with this, and if you have a word or two before we start. You'll get to hear his testimony.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes,
How do you know that to be the case?
because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I worked for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials could detect?
They'd never see it.
And your testimony is under oath,
Yes, sir.
and the testimony you've given is true.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
In 2000, I was working for Yang Enterprises, which was a company in Oviedo, Florida, and their chief lobbyist, their corporate attorney, and Speaker of the House of Florida was Tom Feeney.
Tom Feeney was the general counsel and registered lobbyist for Yang Enterprises, even while he was Speaker of the Florida House.
He came in one day, one of my first introductions to him, and he wanted us to build a vote flipping software.
He was asked by Tom Feeney to create essentially a vote rigging software prototype.
My interpretation initially was that he wanted to prevent you evil Democrats, because I was a Republican, from cheating. So we know how bad you are. So he's a Republican, I'm a Republican, which, immediately makes him the good guy right away. So obviously he's not going to try and, steal votes. He wanted it to run on a Windows platform, be touchscreen capable. He wanted it to not have any additional hardware, so you didn't have to bring in a keyboard, you didn't have to sit across the street in a truck. You could just sit there and punch a button, and the votes all flip. And the third thing he wanted was that he wanted it so that in the source code, you could not see the fact that it was being flipped. Well, not only you shouldn't be doing that, but you can't do that. You cannot hide in the source code. Done deal. I can't do it. Nobody else can either.
Tom Feeney is best known for being the guy in the 2000 election. No matter what the Supreme Court decided, he was going to assure that the electoral votes went to George W. Bush. He had previously, in 1994, been the running mate to Jeb Bush in Jeb's initial bid for governor in Florida, which he lost.
So I built it for him, gave it to Mrs. Yang along with the sheet on how you prevent vote fraud. She said, you don't understand. In order to get this contract, we have to hide the vote fraud in the source code. This is to flip the vote in South Florida. Which, I'm thinking, what are you, a crook?
We can only assume that that's what Feeney told her. For some reason, that's what she felt, that's what she knew, and that's what she told Clint Curtis. And that's what he has in his sworn affidavit.
He had a lot of political theory about, you don't have to actually beat the Democrats in the Democratic area, you just have to reduce the margin enough so overall it weakens it. And you win that way, and he's just a wild man. I mean, he was willing to do anything to win. And I'm thinking, well, these people are crooked, but they're probably crazy. No one's going to sit by and let them do this anyway. They tried to bribe me to come back to them. Eventually it got up to, $1 million. So give me $1 million to come back. Then it was $1 million to just leave Tallahassee. And Feeney will get me a job anywhere I want to work. Anywhere. Name the price, name the location, you're there. Now that you've got your vote and you want to flip it, you hit the R, hit the S, and it flips. Bush wins. That's simple. 24 lines of code, you never see it. Kind of felt responsible, like I wrote a blueprint for him. Not that I'm the only one in the world who could do that, Any baby programmer would know how to do that. It is super easy. It takes nothing. It's just some hidden buttons on a screen. You hit the little hidden buttons. It gives 51% to the guy you want to win, gives the other 49. So it doesn't matter how you vote, the machine votes for you.
So in other words, there is absolutely no assurance whatsoever on anything with regard to these machines?
Absolutely none, unless you look at the source code and make sure it's safe before it goes in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Mathers. I know that Congresswoman Waters has...
Clint Curtis announced that he was going to run against Tom Feeney for that U.S. House seat. He changed his party affiliation from Republican to Democrat.
One of the reasons I switched is because all those Republican values of balanced budget and personal privacy, the Republicans have just discarded that.
He did extraordinarily well for a first-time politician.
We'll actually compare our vote totals to the vote totals that came in precinct by precinct. We'll find out if any flip occurred, and we'll validate.
He and his campaign have, since the election, been going door to door, getting affidavits from voters, how they voted in the election.
If we can find several precincts where we have more voters who said they voted for me than the votes show, that puts into question not only my totals, but the whole election.
In some of these areas, he's finding 20% swings against him, and he's got the affidavits from voters to prove it.
I grew up thinking you're supposed to do the right thing, and that's what I do. I'll do it until someone makes it so I can't.
That's what I was going to address. Representative Conyers, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, agreed to host 2 meetings on this problem of the 2004 election results. He did so in, the first one was in Washington, and it was covered by C-SPAN. This was the second one, and it was supposed to occur in the State House. The Republicans objected to the State House being used for this purpose. So it was convened in the City Council, which was controlled by the Democratic Party. And you see a state senator sitting as chairman at this point. When the hearing started, it was chaired by Congressman Conyers. Jesse Jackson is sitting next to me in the center of this. You're seeing the back of his head. And Jesse turns to me and says, Cliff, where's the dynamite witness you had? And I said, Congressman Conyers won't let us put him on because he's going to criticize Congressman Feeney, who's on the House Judiciary Committee. So at that point, Jesse Jackson goes up and asks Conyers to excuse himself and let someone else chair the meeting. And that's what happens. So he goes to the men's room, he's gone. And this, we call this witness. And that's the sequence of events. And interestingly, Stephanie Tubbs Jones is on the panel. And Stephanie Tubbs Jones is the person who we asked to challenge the Ohio electoral vote on the House floor, which she did. And so it was an interesting interchange. And any more questions about it? Yes, sir.
Wasn't Conyers was instrumental or part of helping pass the Help America Vote Act, which started?
I don't think
Bush did in 2000.
No, that was really a Karl Rove innovation. He worked through Barry Jackson, his
committee could have
top assistant, went to Bob May, who ran the House Administration Committee. But at the time, that had bipartisan support. It had public interest group support because it was in the name of making voting more secure, and it was a con.
So is this software still in operation? Same machine, same software?
The same problem is in effect because what happened after Florida was it was basically a funding program of a couple $2 billion to get the states to get rid of the punch card ballots, the hanging chads. They were blaming the problems in Florida on the hanging chads, primitive technology. It wasn't primitive technology, it was the cheating with hanging chads. All right, so they get the funding for electronic voting machines, and those are as Clint Curtis says, are as vulnerable as if you allow the programming by private groups that are not supervised, and you allow machines which are insecure or vulnerable to hacking, you open up the system to more massive hacking than we ever had before.
So I heard in Marin they just upgraded to 2003, Windows 2003, which is one of the worst operating systems if you ask me.
They also use the Diebold GEMS software.
And that's the only one that's the latest certified. Can you say something about the certification and who's behind certifying that software for $2 million to get it?
Well, we have a corrupt system.
Yeah.
We have a corrupt system, and it's more corrupt than it's ever been before. And we have not changed it. The Help America Vote Act made it worse. And it has not really changed. And the exit polls, which we introduced that topic shortly. The exit polls are a form of audit. It's an internationally recognized gold standard for detecting fraud in elections. And it has been, the red flag has been up again. And in this primary, currently going on, it's up. Every primary except Oklahoma. It's saying fraud. Now, does that mean that there is absolute certainty that it's fraud? Yeah, probably. That's what it means.
One point on the machines, and how many people have been to any of the tests and watched the machines tested? If the testing is massively rigorous, does the machine start when it's turned on? When you vote, does it record the vote? So what they don't ask, for example, which Cliff and I asked in the lawsuit, well, part of the problem, We asked essentially a programmer, how many lines of code do you need to count? He said, I can do it prime plus 1, 1,500 lines, right? In Franklin County in 2004, 2.1 million lines of code. So the broader question, if you're hiding something in the code, and this is the key thing we all need to take away, what I told Congress about a month ago, is why do you have private, partisan, for-profit companies secretly counting the ballots with proprietary software? Unless you want your system hacked, you can't think of a worse possible system. In Ohio, we're blessed because the people counting the vote are the Right to Life movement, right? The companies counting the vote in 2004. Mike Connell, major donor to Right to Life. I know the Right to Life director. I report on him. You know, I'm friendly with him, John Coates. Yeah, major donor. Who maintains the machines and does all the poll books? Triad. When they're not busy running the elections, maintaining the data banks for almost every county and the poll books, they're busy doing Right to Life protests, and they live in this virtual bunker. So that's who's handling the databases, right? And who, of course, counted the votes when the supercomputers went down for the first time? Jeff Aberbeck, former right-wing, born-again, evangelical minister who just happened to get into server farms and own a large, massive server farm serving the Swift boaters that were attacking Kerry, serving the White House, where Rove's 20 million missing email are, and counting the votes from Ohio. How is this even possible in a democracy to have such non-transparency?
Okay, thank you. So there, I noticed you had a question, and you have a question?
My question, I think I know the answer, but how do these miscreants get access to the computers which actually flip the votes? Is it by hacking? I mean, do they need physical access to the computer? How do they get this
BlackBerry.
stuff in?
BlackBerry.
Well, there's really, there's 12 general areas, which include everything from remote access. I mean, you can do it from the parking lot, to the internet, to the coding, Easter eggs. I mean, there's through the central tabulators, which we now count people in fractions. Bev Harris has just released that paper, to internet access as well. So as many possible ways that you can deal or hack anything, all of this is being done. For example, in 2012, it came out, Free Press reported, that the people that own the third largest voting company in America, Hardinter Civic, were Bainco people. Company started by Romney, right? Bainco. So, and his personal family's investment fund was invested in the company as well. So a presidential candidate is owning the system. Now, when they did an analysis, it wasn't surprising that if you're running for office, you're going to buy the third largest computer company to count the votes. It counted Cincinnati, Ohio, which was considered the swing and key to winning in Ohio. But when you looked at all 12 areas, right, is there remote access? Is it integrated, right? Can you, if you put one thumb drive in one precinct, does it pollute the entire system? Is he bought Hardinter Civic, which failed all 12 areas of computer security. So it could be hacked remotely from the internet, through malware, through thumb drives, through codes, through the internet, through the central tabulators. It was designed to be hacked in every way conceivable.
And it's in several counties in California.
And in 2002, Bob Urosevich of Diebold or ESNS, what they vary between them, personally delivered what do we call those things? So you stick in the patches. To his consultants and people for insertion in the county vote tabulators. And this was picked up, it was reported, I forget the guy's name, but he's available to testify. He reported to Stephen Spoonamore, it was reported to the FBI, but that's how they stole the Georgia, the Senator Cleland and the governor's race in 2002. In 2012, Bob, Free Press, investigators were tipped off that they were going to put, ES&S was going to put 30 of these patches on the most populous counties in the state of Ohio for the 2012 election. This would have been enough to switch the election from Obama to Romney. And it was reported, we went into federal court and state court, we put the spotlight on it, we had the FBI and the Justice Department all over it. They didn't flip the switch, which is why Karl Rove was very embarrassed that night on Fox News when they called it for Obama, and he said, wait a minute, the Ohio vote's not in, because nobody told Karl Rove about what was going on in Ohio.
Well, and just part of that, when you were looking what was going on with custom patches, I knew that because a Republican woman who worked on the machine testing commission, when she heard about these patches, they were supposed to be experimental. You're allowed one patch in one precinct to be experimental. They were doing it on well over 30 counties. They had 44 planned, but ended up with 30 counties. So also these people, if you've ever looked at who these people are, we looked at ES&S in 2004 and found that the guy that put on most of the patches in areas that weren't matching the exit polls was named Sam Hogsett. So we looked up Mr. Hogsett. Hogsett liked to write letters to the editor. My favorite is he said that his wish in life was to shoot a liberal in the head so that the liberal would know just prior to the bullet penetrating his brain that he, Sam Hogsett, had killed him, not the gun. And this was the guy who was called in by Ken Blackwell to make sure the recount matched.
Ken Blackwell is. I mean,
the Secretary of State in Ohio in 2004.
Who was also the campaign manager for the Bush campaign. And then in 2000, Catherine Harris in Florida was the campaign manager for the Bush campaign at that time. So it's, and Secretary of State. So I just wanted to comment, because we did show the Curtis thing. In 2004, in California actually, which had very few votes for Bush, and in Colorado, there was that flipping thing that was designed by Clint was used, and in Colorado, if you there's the Democratic down ticket and the Republican down ticket, right? Okay, so Bush, the votes, there were many, many votes for Bush with the entire Democratic down ticket. And reversed for the Republicans with the total, with the Democrat with Kerry up at the top, okay? So this is a very unusual kind of event, and it did happen in California with Boxer and Bush. But there were so few votes for Bush here that it didn't count very much. Yeah?
What I need to understand, if there's a way to understand it, is if all of this has been taken to courts and if it's in the public domain information, why is it that our leaders are ignoring this issue and don't want to bring liberty and justice for all?
Okay, having been involved with this for a long time, I want to say, if I'm a politician, I want you to vote for me. I don't want to look like there's something with election fraud, that something's going to happen to your vote, okay? And I want you to write me a big check. So I want to be able to trust you to trust that money, and me to trust too, that money's going to a good cause. And if I'm a TV station, oh my God, I'm looking forward to those billions of dollars of money rolling in of TV ads for the Republican or Democratic candidate. Oh my God, I don't want to show anything about election fraud. And then I'll get my money from the parties, okay? And if I'm a election official, I'm a upstanding government, I'm a government official, this is my career. And in fact, I had to choose the voting machines, and I had such a wonderful lunch with that voting machine vendor from Diebold, and they were competing, ES&S and Diebold, but I went with Diebold, now called Dominion. So I have great friendships, it's kind of sort of like the pharmaceutical companies with doctors, and, and then I want to defend my choice. If something bad looks like it's happening in my county, I beg your pardon. I'm going to defend my choice, which is what happened in the Chicago Board of Elections meeting, if anyone saw the YouTube that we put out, where someone was seeing the Bernie votes erased and the Clinton votes added. And then when the person who had a PhD in political science was watching this happen, and she questioned it in front of the Board of Elections, the response of the woman, and I have seen a lot of defensive behavior on the part of election officials. That does not mean all of them, okay? That was, have you ever been to an audit before? Are you a professional audit monitor? I mean, if you see people erasing votes and then adding votes, and this was with the people who were working for the Board of Elections, and the Board of Elections, they say, hey, we've got these machines we trust, and the vote totals are more likely to be reliable, and of course they want to support their career, and we want you to be a really careful counter. So what happened in Ohio, is and also here is, if you want to keep your job, you want to follow your boss. And I remember that in 2004 in Ohio, the guy put the cheat sheets on the hallway.
Yeah, that was the Rapp family, which I talked about, Triad, which leads the Right to Life movement in the state. He showed up in Hocking County for the recount. They were going to count 3%. He came in, the central tabulator in Hocking County, a poor county, was a 12-year-old Dell. So he looked at the computer. He showed up unannounced, so he's got a good work ethic. He wasn't required to come in, showed up, and then the hard drive crashed. But luckily, he just happened in his car to have a 12-year-old Dell hard drive. Hey, he's thrifty. So he came in and he started it, and he told Cheryl Eaton, who testified under oath, lost her job for bringing this up as a whistleblower, said, if you leave the machine on and just read these numbers, and I'll give you a cheat sheet to read, they'll match. So she thought, and she liked the Rapp family. I was like, nice guys, they're real friendly, good God-fearing Christian people. But when she brought it to the attention of John Conyers, she was fired, and not only she was fired, but it was a 2-2 tie of the board, and then the Secretary of State, the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, Ken Blackwell, had her fired. So the whistleblowers end up fired.
Yeah, I was at a meeting with a representative, the guy was head of the Republicans for Obama, and a person from the Obama campaign was there, and I made the comment that, or Henry made the comment, another lawyer made the comment that Obama had it wrapped up. And the guy from the Obama campaign said, don't say that. We have to overcome the fraud factor.
Wow.
So what you have to understand about this vote shifting, it's only done about 3, or they're pushing it this time, but 3 points, which gives you a net 6. You're moving 3 points from candidate A to candidate B, which is a net 6-point difference in the final result. All right, now, so that's what happened in 2008. Obama won by a substantially larger margin than was reported. The exit polls showed him winning by a larger margin. He, in fact, did win by a larger margin. Approaching 2012, I asked Van Jones, hey, Van, the Free Press is reporting that the Republicans have been shifting these votes. Is there any reason Obama's FBI would not want to investigate and put a stop to this? And it was in the 2012 election that the Justice Department announced that they were sending U.S. attorneys to various states to monitor, not just for access problems, but for fraud. And the FBI was in the Secretary of State of Ohio's offices. So it wasn't just our lawsuit. The FBI and the Justice Department were on the case. They said, you're not getting away with this. No more of this.
Did that help?
Yeah.
So can we count on that now?
Well, there's a recent thing that was reported as a felony in the Bernie campaign in New York, which is that the poll books were purged closer than 90 days before the election, and that's a felony. So that's a new political thing that's developing. I wanted to second, and we want to move on with our show a little bit. I want to second that there's it's really hard to be a whistleblower in our country. After Clint Curtis reported what had happened, of course he lost his job. You know, he was relegated, nobody would hire him. He was relegated to moving boxes at Safeway for 2 years while he tried to make his way through law school. He's now a lawyer. He became a lawyer to defend himself in these situations. But there's another thing that I want to say which is really important, which is that unfortunately it's very, very, very hard to recapture votes once they're stolen, okay? And what Clint did, he was running against Tom Feeney. The whole thing had come out that Tom Feeney was buddies with Bush, and in Florida, Clint Curtis had everybody who voted for him register in a private email or website, in code and everything like that. And it was in a certain precinct area. When he lost, he walked around and he found out that the figures in the electronic voting machine was wrong. And he went as far as the Supreme Court to try to get his, the Florida Supreme Court to try to get his position as that he won the election. He was turned down, and his next opportunity was to go to Congress, which never really happened. I mean, these are very expensive, very laborious things to do, all right? So I just want to say, taking preventative action now with an exit poll, as we're proposing, and the lawsuit that we're going to talk about in a little while, is much better than trying to recoup votes that are lost. Yes?
I thought I read that there's not going to be exit polls in California.
There aren't. I'm not saying that there are. The exit poll lawsuit is going to deal with the other states that have happened and a demand to release raw data. And I definitely expect there's going to be a lot of industry pushback, and then we will need the media to put that out, because we have to educate people about what exit polls are. Many people don't really know what it is. It's just that nice thing that flashes across the screen telling me, who I'm so eager to find out the results, who won. And nobody, very few people know that they're adjusted and manipulated along the way.
Except the Edison group doesn't adjust them in foreign countries. They use them in foreign countries to detect election fraud. So only in the U.S. is their function simply to give you demographic data, some of it which makes no sense when you take a look at the adjusted polls.
So I'd like to move on to our next thing, and I want to mention to you what a man in the middle is. Who doesn't know? Okay, quite a number of people. A man in the middle is a term for a computer that is designed to change results. And you will learn about the man in the middle here, and a lawsuit put together by Cliff Arnabeck and Bob helped stop the man in the middle attacks, both in 2008 and 2012. And the man in the middle computer, I mean, these are ways in which votes are sent off to other states, changed and sent back, but you'll understand it now. So if we could show that.
Yeah, just a timing thing. This is 8 minutes long.
I know.
I see, and it's almost
It's
9
a
o'clock. You
very
guys got
good,
important stuff to tell
no,
us.
it's a very critical thing to do.
Okay, here we go.
And this is why dealing with election integrity can be dangerous.
Sounds like a made-up story. One man rigging state elections to help his boss, President George Bush. After it's done, power players...
45-year-old Michael Connell, an experienced pilot, crashed into a vacant house. Well, tonight, more about Connell and his ties to a possible White House scandal. 19 Action News reporter Blake Chenault with more at 11.
This is where Michael Connell worked, and it was from this building that he provided services to President Bush. An investigation is ongoing to find out exactly what kind of services Connell from this building provided to the president. The fatal plane crash of Michael Connell was certainly untimely. The 45-year-old local man was accused of rigging the 2004 election for President Bush, a claim that Connell denied under oath. But under closer examination, civil attorney Clifford Arnabeck wanted Connell placed under federal protection. Arnabeck was worried that if Connell told all that he knew about President Bush and the 2004 campaign, Connell's life would be in jeopardy. Arnabeck said he received confidential information that Republican operative Karl Rove threatened Connell and his wife if Connell told all that he knew. So who exactly is Michael Connell? Well, he worked here as a Republican computer specialist and consultant. Basically, he's accused of taking votes in 2004 from then-candidate John Kerry and diverting them to President Bush throughout the state of Ohio. But last month, under oath in a federal court, Connell denied having any knowledge of manipulating votes. Records show the Bush campaign paid Connell's business some $800,000 in 2004, but it's unclear for what. Connell, though, was apparently told by a close friend not to fly his plane because the plane might be sabotaged. And twice in the last 2 months, Connell, who was an experienced pilot, canceled 2 flights because of suspicious problems with his plane. And now, last night, he had another problem with his plane, but this one took his life. It is too early to tell if the federal investigation into the cause of Connell's death has any kind of tie to the work he provided from this office to the president. In Richfield, Blake Chenault, 19 Action News.
Mike Connell has been named as Karl Rove's computer guru since 2000. The lawyers in the case refer to Connell as a high IQ Forrest Gump because he's been on the scene of every dubious election we've had over the last 8 years, starting with Florida 2000. Now, he has been named by a man named Stephen Spoonamore, S-P-O-O-N-A-M-O-R-E, who's a very unusual and particularly unimpeachable kind of whistleblower. He's a conservative Republican. He's a former McCain supporter, but above all, he is a renowned and highly successful expert at the detection of computer fraud. He works for big banks, he works for foreign governments, the Secret Service. His job is to figure out how computers are used to steal money or information or votes. Well, he's named a lot of people in the Bush-Cheney election subversion conspiracy. He's worked with them. He knows them personally. And months ago, he named Mike Connell and his company GovTech Solutions as having played a crucial role in basically the electronic subversion of the vote in Ohio in 2004, and Spoonamore has actually described the computer architecture that was used to do this. Now, on the strength of this testimony, the lawyers in the case had the judge issue a subpoena to Mike Connell last week. Connell defied the subpoena. He was in contempt. Late last week, the lawyers filed a motion to compel compliance, and to everyone's surprise and delight, the judge ordered Connell to appear today and to be deposed for 2 hours about his role in this long-standing electronic plot, basically, to flip votes towards the Republicans. Some of this deposition will be sealed, and I have to tell you the part that will be sealed. Apparently, Rove has threatened Connell. He told him that if Connell did not take the fall for this whole thing, the Department of Justice would start investigating Connell's wife, Heather, for improper lobbying practices. Now, that part of the deposition we're not going to know the answers to. But what's astonishing to me...
Who does she lobby for?
Various politicians and so on. Whether she's guilty or innocent is beside the point. Because as we know, the Department of Justice is a cudgel in the collective hands of the Bush administration. This would be more selective prosecution. But what's really astonishing here is that Karl Rove could make that threat with such impunity. This shut Connell up. And he was, earlier inclined to talk about what was going on. Then he got himself 3 very expensive Republican attorneys who promised that they would make sure he could not be deposed before Election Day. Well, hallelujah, he's being deposed before Election Day. And the reason why... Today. The reason why this is so important, and the strategy behind the early part of this case all along has been that if we can shine a spotlight on the perpetrators of this kind of fraud before Election Day, make them nervous, make them pull in their horns, distract them, is a good chance that they might not try to do what they're clearly ready to do. Because let me just add, Connell is on the McCain payroll. He's working for McCain right now, and he specializes in a particular kind of computer architecture whose only purpose, Spoonamore says, is to steal votes.
I want to go back to 2 issues. One, how do you know Karl Rove made these threats? That's a very strong allegation.
Well, it is a very strong allegation. It comes from the lawyers. That the lawyers were evidently told by Connell or someone close to him. But this stuff has been on the website of Velvet Revolution. Ross Story has reported it. The media, however, has remained over-focused, of course, on Acorn, which is a nothing story. But let me make clear that the brouhaha over Acorn, right, this orchestrated propaganda drive about Acorn, has many distracting purposes, and one of them, I promise you, is to distract us from this case. This case is an Ohio RICO case. Well, lately, the Republicans filed an Ohio RICO case against Acorn, and I think the
RICO meaning racketeering.
It's a racketeering case. Ohio has the strongest racketeering statute in the country. This is one of the reasons why the lawyers decided to go there and do this.
What do you mean he specializes in the computer architecture, the internet architecture that can steal elections?
Well, it's a system. If people go to the website for Velvet Revolution, particularly www.rovecybergate.com, they'll find the documents that Spoonamore has filed describing the setup that's known as man in the middle. This happened in Ohio in 2004. It involves shunting the data that comes from the website for the Secretary of State, I mean the election returns, taking those election returns as they come to the website in real time and shunting them to a computer somewhere else. What happened in 2004 was the election returns from Ken Blackwell's website were shunted to a computer in a basement in Chattanooga, Tennessee, under the control of a very partisan private company to which Connell was connected. The data was shunted to this strange computer in Chattanooga and then directed back to the Secretary of State's website. As Spoonamore has said, the only purpose of doing this, man in the middle thing, is to commit crime.
before Congress, and we were negotiating with Representative Conyers. And what happened the week, Cliff and I were supposed to go out there and have these hearings, and there was a possibility he was going to come in and testify. That week, Conyers' wife was indicted on a felony. And Conyers itself, it came out, some of his staff had given turkeys away from the Mother Waddle's perpetual mission, and that might be a felony as well to induce voting, even though he's in a very safe district. So we couldn't get him to come in. And then I was working with Dennis Kucinich, and I wrote this long memo, but it was taking too long. And Spoonamore will tell you, as Cliff knows, that he got to that Spoonamore was asked, how do I get rid of stuff permanently? And it was Spoonamore that was urging him, if you're talking about getting rid of stuff that had come directly from the White House and Rove's email, you really need to go before Congress and get immunity on this.
After Conyers backed out, Bob was asked to set up a meeting with Dennis Kucinich at the Capitol. And that's where we met.
And me too.
Lori came out from California, and Bob and I came out from Ohio. We met with Dennis Kucinich. And we were basically asking him to convene a meeting of the Government Operations Subcommittee to do this. Now, I don't know how famous Danny Sheehan is in California. Danny, are you famous here?
I don't know.
Danny Sheehan is a classmate of mine from law school. He's one of the greatest lawyers in the country today.
Yes.
Danny Sheehan was the leader of the Christic Institute that took on the Iran-Contra scandal. Now, if somebody says, well, does that make him a conspiracy theorist? Folks, Iran-Contra was a proven conspiracy. There was a prosecution by the special prosecutor, Welsh, and convictions. And yes, there was a presidential pardon, but there's no question there was an Iran-Contra conspiracy. Danny Sheehan had brought a private racketeering action in Florida against some of the conspirators, names who were famous. And his case, which was brilliant and proper in every respect, was dismissed by a district judge in Miami. So Danny and I are talking, and I said, Danny, how in the world did you lose your case at the Court of Appeals level? And he said, they killed the presiding judge, who was a progressive Democrat and a great civil rights champion in this country, a guy named Robert Vance. Coincidentally, in my investigation of the Enterprise, which the tipster who had told us about the threats against Mike Connell's life had told us that if you think this election stealing is being done in Ohio, it's not based in Ohio, it's based in Enterprise, Alabama. That had taken me to Enterprise, Alabama, and a witness who told me how the Enterprise had assassinated Judge Vance. So going to Lori's point, the folks who are behind this, a manifestation of the military-industrial complex that makes trillions of dollars off of this sort of thing, assassinated Mike Connell because he wouldn't take the fall. And Mike Connell was a good and honest man. And Danny was working with me and Bob and Lori at the very point that we were setting up his testimony. So I feel privileged to see you again, Danny, after, 45 years? We've talked a lot since then, but I wanted you to know Danny's role in this.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
So, one quick question. So, did you actually get any testimony from Connell? Because it looks like you did.
Mike Connell was set up to be the fall guy for the theft of the 2004 election. And how was he set up? He was set up because he was given the contract to do the web design. They put Smart Tech into his contract as a subcontractor to do the backup of the entire election function of the Secretary of State's office.
Mirror oversight.
So when I asked him, I said, well, isn't this a conflict to have a Republican organization with complete control over the election machinery of Ohio in the presidential election, where Karl Rove has his private server in the same building? Well, if it is, I had nothing to do with it. He specifically said they put it there, meaning Blackwell, Rove, not him. He's an honest man, and he didn't lie. He did not take the fall, and he exposed who was responsible. And that's why they killed him. And the cover letter that was in this movie, from the person sending the tip, or sending the disclosure, he says, attached is a memo that's not supposed to exist. Mike Connell was not a national security threat. And then the memo, the after action report, describes, eliminate NST, national security threat, gave the markings to his plane at College Park, Maryland, and then talks about how they entered the field, they affixed the device to his navigation system, sanitized the cockpit, left the field, mission accomplished. Later that day, the crash occurs. Yes, sir.
Cliff, just to mention our previous conversation, we are working with Linda Roberts, the registrar from Marin County, asking her to join San Francisco County in pioneering open source software election systems. So there is hope, albeit there's a lot of work to be done. If we can get proper systems into place, maybe by 2018, 2020, we could provide some solution here. So it's not a fait accompli that this is, the way it's always going to be. Hopefully, there is a little light in the tunnel, and I know Jim Soper sitting in the corner there.
I want to recognize Lori Grace. And I don't believe anyone in this room realizes her role in protecting the integrity of the elections in this country. In that regard, I want to focus not on these past elections in which she's played a very substantial role, a critical role, a seminal role, but in this election, in this primary election, Lori Grace is behind making possible the election litigation, which is going to expose, before the California primary and before the Democratic convention, is going to expose the exit polls, the real exit polls results, so that the public will know that there are all these red flags out. And this is going to affect the our decisions as a people of this country. And it's going to affect this election. Lori Grace is also behind the initiative to have a citizen exit poll in California for this current election. And this is something, when we threatened, and Bob did an excellent article on this, we put out the word that we were going to be filing this suit to require the publication of the exit poll results. What happened? They decided we won't have any more exit polls.
Yeah.
And Lori Grace is the person who stepped in to the breach to get citizen exit polls set up. And this is a real hero of our democracy.
Also, just briefly, after the hearings in Washington, within the last month, some of you may know Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia mentioned Diebold by name, said it was absurd to have these private companies secretly counting the vote, has introduced a bill demanding not only open source immediately, but a 3% audit.
Where?
Nationally? Nationally, yeah.
Okay.
So the first, other than John Conyers, right, who's done volume upon volume and been ignored, This is really the first time that a congressman has said, I believe, these people are using these machineries to their advantage.
What was his name?
Hank Johnson of Georgia. And the bill has just been introduced. So very important, to get people behind it. And it directly takes on the private partisan companies secretly counting the vote.
What do you attribute Conyers' interesting lack of position? I mean, you mentioned that maybe they were looking at him and making some threats, but I mean, you mentioned him a few times.
Well, his wife was indicted, I mean, again, the week that all this was supposed to happen. He came under, of course, heavy fire. Also, look, there's a variety of staff people, to be quite frank. Perry Applebaum, Joel Siegel, there was another guy. His staff knew exactly what was going on there. I mean, we sent them, we used the suit to produce all this evidence, and so all those people were sort of retired. They brought in a new attorney for him who worked for People for the American Way and also happened to come from John Roberts, the Republican Supreme Court Justice, his law firm. So what they did is they really kind of stripped him of his staff, indicted his wife, and investigated him. Also, remember what happened with, in this case with Michael Connell. He was the first man in history to get his computer servers behind the firewall of the U.S. Congress. Prior to that, it had always been done by staff. 4 committees, right? The Administrative Committee, where Bob Ney was, the House Intelligence Committee, the House Ways and Means, and the House Judiciary Committee. So it means one of the most partisan right-wing companies in America, right? GovTech, which is also new media that does all of the work, IT work for the Republican Party and the Bush family, is in fact now looking at every single message coming out of the Intelligence Committee and coming out of the Ways and Means and Judicial Committee. I mean, just unheard of, unbelievable that this would happen.
In the spirit of David Paul. In the spirit of solutions and also asking for clarification. I mean, seems like there's legislative routes to defend the existing laws in the electoral system. There's legislative routes to make new laws to make it more open and source. But is each state different? I mean, I'm thinking the same. Most change comes local.
Right. Yes.
Where is I'm not saying the only way, but the angle to make these changes? Is it legislative initiatives? Is it lawsuits? I mean, is it all of this? And each state is different. I mean, just wondering where we can attack this, because I don't think there's a law that says computers by private companies can't control elections.
Oklahoma actually programs their own computer, the state of Oklahoma. And that's the one place where Bernie actually won, where the votes showed him getting more votes than the exit polls predicted.
Even though that's a proprietary code, it is independent.
Yes, sir. Just where this change
There's
is
something missing here. And what's missing is that there isn't a story by ABC, NBC, CBS, by NPR, by The Atlantic, by Harper's, by the Washington Post, the New York Times. The Times has done 1 or 2 very narrow stories on election fraud. But overall, no one seems to have gotten to the media, the legitimate media, to report this.
I'd like to comment on this. I'd like to comment on this. So basically, it started when we were tracking the IP address of Mike Connell before he died, when it was like about 2000, it was before the 2008 election. And we sat in 60 minutes talking to the director. We showed data that we had, that things had been really changed. And we sat with them, and this was, I think, before I met you at Dennis Kucinich. And we were showing that we were tracking this guy. We knew what was going on. We knew that he could change the nature of the election. And this was shortly with the McCain-Obama election, okay? And the director listened to our story, he looked at the slides, and then he said later, well, we'll think about it. And then he decided to focus on the DUI that McCain had many years ago, okay? Now, I want to let you know the media is terrified of losing the financial support. You know, newspapers want to keep getting those political ads. Television stories, television stations want to get the money too. All you have to do is to follow the money. Even the exit poll, Edison adjusts the exit polls because he wants to get the money again from the media consortium in the next election. So everything depends on following the money in people's careers and people's lives, and the great elephant in the room, known as election fraud, sits. And so the only thing I think we can do, which I really appreciate, you know, Bob and Cliff being here and all of you at the Voter Rights Task Force, we have to educate so the public becomes aware. Now, we've already got a lot of people in the Bernie campaign upset because they're starting to see stuff. And we have some possible solutions, but this is going to require, you know, lots of people to make a difference in this. And first of all, I want to also thank you for acknowledging me. And I have been involved behind the scenes, and also to protect myself. And I had all the guys out in front. And I was one of the chief strategists. And before Mike Connell died, you know, I was talking to Bishop Gumbleton in Chicago about how could we convince this Catholic not to change the elections to save the babies. Because Cheney and Rove had made a deal with Mike Connell and back and forth. And Mike Connell said, you get abortion off the table in this country, and you can relax about any election you want. And so anyway, he's now dead. We're on to more. And Jim, you had a comment about this election, I think.
I have a couple of quick comments, which I'll address the legislation and so on. And first, your question about the software. The central tabulator, I'm a programmer. My name is Jim Soper, Voting Rights Task Force, and website ConeItisCast.org, where I have a diagram of how all the information flows throughout an election system. The least protected, but the central piece in the whole puzzle is the central tabulator. It has the weakest passwords. I mean, the passwords were brilliant, you know, 8 ones. This is recorded. And it's kept inside a locked room, but anybody in that room who has the password can do whatever they want to your votes. The second source then is the source code coming in from the people who write the source code, and they were talking about downloading patches. Vulnerability, huge vulnerability. This is why open source is needed. It's not the complete solution, but it helps block one thing, one part of it. Why are the machines not getting certified? The certification process is terribly cumbersome at this point. It costs over $1 million to get a new machine, new system certified, and if you go through the corrupt EAC, it will take a year. California is now taking control of its own certification, and I'm not quite, we don't have any real measurement about how quickly that goes, but the whole process got clogged down. And there's no money now to buy new machines, so the companies are not making new machines. We are having to rely on, hopefully, a project out of San Francisco, potentially out of Los Angeles, potentially out of Austin, Texas, open source systems or partially open source systems to help us look at the source code, which is the biggest thing we need to look at. Legislation. The Voting Rights Task Force has been working on for 7 years to get a bill introduced to require that the information that's in the tabulator, which has got all the information about how many votes each candidate got in each precinct, is in a database. It's not hard, folks. And we've been saying, get it up on the internet starting on election night. After 7 years of work, the Voting Rights Task Force finally got a bill introduced by Tony Thurmond, AB 2824. It is now up before the Appropriations Committee on Friday. Unfortunately, the Registrar's Organization has come out opposed to this. They don't, the bill was written so, if you can't do it, you don't have to do it. We don't want it to be cumbersome. We've had repeated appeals. We want to work with you to make the wording so you can do your work without serious interruption. But we want the data up there starting on election night so that people can check it. And the Registrar's Organization came out fully opposed to it, and we're going to try to get it passed anyways. The biggest hurdle will be Friday when it's appropriations because of the money. Even though this shouldn't cost a lot of money, anything that they can say, oh, well, it's going to cost, $200 million or whatever to do this. No, it's not. This is a simple thing. We wrote the bill, so it'll be cheap. We'll see what happens. But this takes a lot of work, persistent work. And it's 50 states. Fortunately, we're in California. We're in a big one that has influence. But what we learned 2 days ago is that New York City is already doing this. So when they say that some of the registrars say, oh, we're a big county, we're so busy we can't do it. I'm sorry, New York's doing it. So we're going to push that. But we have 4,000 counties, I believe I heard the number, 50 states. It's all chaotic. And if in California you want to try, this Don made a suggestion in the car, you want to try to organize the elections so that the whole state works in the same way. We have all of our provisional and absentee ballots and crossover ballots done the same way instead of by county. If the state were to dictate to the counties how to do it, then guess who has to pay for it? Because then that's a state mandate. And when you have a state mandate, the state of California has to pay for it. So if you're trying to rework how we conduct our elections, which has a huge problem, it's going to cost Sacramento, and Sacramento doesn't want to pay for it. So we have a lot of work to do. The focus right now is get AB 2824. I think next year we're going to be working on getting some money for open source systems.
John, you want to say something?
Yeah. Thank you for doing that work. In addition to everything that Bernie's campaign has accomplished, we now see how election fraud is taking place, state by state by state. And we have potentially millions and millions of people who, for the first time, are beginning to grasp just how fragile the democracy is and how easily things like Nevada, things like Kentucky, things like Massachusetts can easily be flipped. And so we have this huge opportunity to reach out to all the Bernie people, the rank and file, and say, don't disappear. Now that you've learned all this stuff about all these issues and they're resonating with you, here's one more. It's not just campaign finance reform, it's a voting election reform nationwide. And so we have an opportunity before June 7th to get word out on all the Bernie Facebook pages that where tens of thousands, 100,000 people are, to say, pay attention on June 7th. Be aware that county by county, the instructions to county clerks when you walk in as a nonpartisan voter can vary, literally precinct by precinct, depending on the training that's taken place. We've been jumping all over this in the last 5 days, and Richard here has done yo person's work to actually talk to 3 county registrars' offices and say, your training is wrong. You're not telling people how they should be voting or the options that they have when they walk in. So that's a huge opportunity for us this year in the election integrity community.
In response to your question, I want to say what I feel most strongly about, and that is that for the political revolution that Bernie Sanders has so eloquently described as being necessary, there must be an election integrity revolution. And that election integrity revolution will happen through the exit poll that Lori launched in California,
Which
because
we need more help and money for.
because that California has more votes than any other state, and this will be very influential in what happens at the convention. And the second thing is the lawsuit that I've been talking about, and put the other side on notice, is going to be a racketeering lawsuit.
Good.
And it's going to include every stolen, every manipulated election in this primary season, as well as a lot of others. So the election integrity revolution has been launched, and it's going to happen, and it's going to, and the political revolution that Bernie Sanders described is therefore also going to happen. And he, no doubt in my mind, Bernie Sanders will be the Democratic nominee.
Yeah!
Okay, with that, I put up Stephen Jaffe and want to introduce you. If you could come forward and talk a little bit about the lawsuit you put on, which addresses some of the problems, Don, that, you talked about.
Thank you. I know all the lawyers here will understand that I have to be very cautious with what I say. This case is in a procedural posture right now where we're going to be going in and asking the court for some relief. So I can't really get into the weeds and a lot of the deep facts of what the case is about. This gentleman over here stole all my thunder because that is what the case is about. That is what the case is about. The various counties around the state have been purveying misinformation, no information, inconsistent information, and I think there's 53 counties in the state, and there's 58, and there's 58 versions of how to vote in this election. We have focused on the group of people known as NPP voters, no party preference. Because the Democrats are holding an open primary, an NPP voter has a right to vote in the Democratic primary. However, saying that and pulling that off, there appears to be a rather wide gap between those two positions. Our lawsuit was designed to do two things. One of them legal, the other one, frankly, PR. The first thing is to win the case and try to get a judge to grant some kinds of relief. We've got a long list of relief we've asked for. That's publicly available in the lawsuit. Some of them are very ambitious, I guess I would call it, such as extending the registration date until the election day, and things of that, and fixing voters who mailed in NPP ballots but didn't know they had a right to mail in a different ballot, and talking about how to repair that. Trying to unring that bell is going to be very, very difficult. But some of the things we're asking for are easy for a court to order, such as a judge ordering the county clerks to disseminate public information via email, radio, press, about the correct information on how an NPP voter can obtain a Democratic ballot and vote for the Democratic candidate of their choice. Hopefully, it's an old guy with white hair. But the lawsuit itself on its face is completely nonpartisan. One of our plaintiffs is, no kidding, the American Independent Party, not known for liberal views. And the other plaintiff is a grassroots Bernie supportive group. We also have two voters. One is a registered Democrat, and the other one is a registered NPP voter. So we've tried to cover all the bases on that. So all I can tell you, without divulging stuff I can't tell you, is stay tuned. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to mention to you, just for your own knowledge, you know, CACEO, C-A-C-E-O, they're an interesting group. Their lobbyist, Barry Brokow, is also a lobbyist for Microsoft. So he wears two hats, and we've noticed that their positions seem affected by their close relationships with the vendors themselves, as well as Microsoft. So that's just something to put forward to you in case it comes in handy.
Well, there's no question lawsuits such as this and that Cliff and Bob have been talking about just grow. The issues seem to grow out of them, and you could talk for weeks here about what's going on. But
Yeah, I just had, I mean, can't they just treat that Meldon, no party preference as a surrender? Because you have I mean, that's why you asked that, for that relief, correct? Because you have the surrender rule on the ballot. In order to vote in the primary, they would have to surrender it anyway.
well,
It isn't a constructive surrender.
surrender in the sense if you go to a polling place
Right,
and turn in
exactly,
Yeah, but people have mailed in already.
yeah.
But you can count that constructively as a surrender for relief purposes, because it was.
But then how do you determine which presidential candidate they voted for?
You don't. You just treat it as a surrender and let them vote in the primary.
But they already voted.
The issue we're gonna run
they
into.
surrendered their ballot.
No, if they sent it in.
It's
to
vote
get
by
the
mail.
ballot.
But
Yeah.
constructively, they surrendered it because they
Well, I
weren't.
understand what you're saying. The issue we're gonna run into, and I'm not even remotely as knowledgeable as most of the people in this room are on election law. I'm an employment law lawyer. I represent employees. But the issue we're gonna run into, I have been a litigator for 45 years, however, is that judges are very reluctant to make orders they don't think can be effectively or practically enforced. No matter how lofty or legal they think their orders are, if they don't think the order can be implemented, then they won't do it. And that's the pressure we're running into. We're a week from Tuesday is the election. And fixing some of these issues in that short of a time is very difficult. So we're running into logistical and practical enforcement problems as well as, that's why well, I can't say, I shouldn't say anything.
Okay, well,
Yes?
I have a quick question point. A friend of mine was a Green Party member and voted for Nader many years ago. She then became a Democrat, switched many years ago. She receives her ballot from the Marin registrar. It says that she is a Green Party member.
That's what happened in New York as well.
So she sent out to her list, check your registration, and she got back, many people had that happen here in Marin.
Oh, really?
She went
Wow.
and she re-registered before the 23rd. But I mentioned that to people I know in Los Angeles and other places, to check, everybody needs to check their registration, and if in fact you could get it extended, because people don't look at that sample ballot. And I checked mine, and I checked my son's, who's an MPP, he's in LA, he's getting an absentee ballot, and he had to fill out this form and sign it, and I have to hand carry it
Well,
to the.
your son can take that NPP ballot, which may not have, it doesn't have Democratic
He doesn't
candidates
have
on
an
it.
NPP ballot now.
Oh, all right.
He's requesting a Democratic ballot because he's got the form now that I emailed him, and he's emailed.
He can
back
do that at
his
his polling place on election day also.
He's in, his polling place is here.
Oh, I see, he's remote,
Los
yes, all
Angeles.
right. My concern frankly is that now that the 23rd is come and gone, and we have this window of time when you cannot fix your registration, if there's going to be purging and switching of parties, that it's going to occur now after it's closed, because the scrutiny on registration is going to go way down now that the registration period has expired. So this should be the period of time when the scrutiny should be enhanced, not diminished.
Wouldn't it be illegal, because I thought you're not allowed purged within 90 days, as I just heard earlier. So if anyone gets purged now, it's totally illegal.
No, that's in New York.
Oh, we've different laws.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, every state has different laws, yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Lori, for that.
Great, wonderful. So now, that'll be the start of one part of the solution, and I'm really happy about that. And I guess, Robert, should we just go right into the exit poll?
Yeah, whatever you, yeah.
Yeah, it's 9:30,
Okay.
so do it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it goes to 10 per day, okay, so I want to remind you. Yes?
Can I just do one quick one?
You very eloquently described how dangerous it is to bring up these issues, how discouraging it is that the media doesn't cover it, the legislators don't want to touch it, and so on. What is the creative approach that just doesn't end run around all of that, because those things aren't going to work?
Having an exit poll.
Is that
Where,
it?
listen, having the lawsuit that brings out demands the raw data, then it gets refused, most likely. Then, ideally, media come in and discuss this, okay? And we need all of your help to get out to the media, okay? All right? So that's with this. And then with respect to the exit poll, you have citizens. They're volunteering or being paid, depending if they do long hours, you know, in learning how to be an exit poller, taking charge of their democracy, seeking to create a difference. Just like Bernie people have, you know, signed up for the first time, decided that elections might be worth doing. And you know, they took charge, then they discover, oh my God, this is the system? Shit. All right? So then the next thing is what can I do? Where can I be? What can I do? So I just want to let you know that we now have on the Institute for American Democracy and Integrity, Election Integrity site, also known as ADE, we have a donate button for the lawsuit and a donate button for the exit poll, okay? And my hope is that you will look at that and go to trustvote.org. It's nonprofit. If you want to give more money, you get to get a tax deduction for $50 or more. And begin to tell other people about getting involved with this. And we are setting this up right now as we speak. We've got quality trainers both in Northern California and Southern California to train people on how to sit in an exit poll. We definitely have volunteers for shorter hours. Probably the longer hours that'll be paid will be 8 to 10 hours. And we can make a difference. So it's citizen involvement.
And the other thing we have is that what you just had on the screen.
Yes.
When have you ever had facts like that? All these states, and you count the votes. That chart has the votes.
Can we put it up again?
Yeah.
Come in.
But you can't go directly to Department of Justice or...
But we are going directly to the Department of Justice and the FBI
Yeah.
and every state attorney general.
Okay.
And we're asking them to initiate criminal actions. But look at this. And what does this prove? The fact. These are facts.
But what is
This is the
labeling does
this is
not
the
tell
number
the
of
story.
votes. In addition to what was reported, this is the number of votes that actually were cast for Bernie Sanders.
We need to switch to the other chart.
Isn't that what this is?
Are these
No,
This is
that's
the.
No, that's an estimate of votes lost by Sanders.
Are these two
This is
charts
the-
on the internet?
This is the number of votes that Bernie Sanders, additional to what has been reported, these are the number of votes that have actually Bernie Sanders has gotten, which means he is ahead
Right.
already before the California primaries.
But not.
Are these two charts available on the internet that we can
Yeah, the
send out?
best place to go would be Richard Charnin blog.
Oh, okay.
Those of you familiar with Richard Charnin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has there ever been such thing as a misvote or a revote?
Let me think, have they ever, no, but election results have changed due to challenges in a few situations. Okay, well, I'm gonna explain as much as I can.
This is the national exit polls. We won't have one for California. We'll just have ours if we can, you know, can raise some money.
Okay, if you, this is Richard Charnin's here. Why don't you give me the Charnin, why don't you give me the Soros one, the other one?
Does the laser work?
Yeah, I could do this. Note Oklahoma, the -4 difference. That's the only state where they do their own programming, where Bernie actually got more votes than the exit poll predicted. So that's 1 out of those of you, I don't want to bore you with stats, but how many are familiar with the 95% confidence interval, right? They got 95 times out of 100 with 95% confidence, we can say in 95 out of 100 elections, it'll fall within this margin of error, right? Universal laws of statistics. So that's Bernie's one. Now, we're expecting Hillary to have one, but she really doesn't, right? She's got at least 10, and in 24 of 26 elections, there's a swing in her direction, either within the margin of error, or in 10 of them, she hits the super lotto, right? The odds are now 1 in about 8.3 billion that you're getting results like Arizona, right? This is based only on one county, because there is no national election polls from the Edison Group. But this one county, take a look at how their exit polls showed people walking out and saying, this is how we voted.
No, second column.
The second column, which one?
Yes, yeah, 63.
Oh, the 63 Sanders exit poll. The Sanders vote is counted at 37. The exit poll said 63. Unbelievable.
Wow.
I mean, 30, the only time I've ever seen this is when there's no exit polls and they're rigging an issue election. Right? I mean, I've never seen it with exit polls. I mean, what's the probability of this difference occurring in reality? And the answer is, it doesn't occur in reality. Nor does Alabama essentially occur, where the Sanders vote is again significantly less at 19.8, 6.1% different here. So the probability is again past the 99.9%. So if you take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right there, again, you've got all these unbelievably results that if it was any other place on earth, any other place, our State Department, through the AID, the Agency on International Development, would be saying, do not certify these election results. Right. We would have at least 10 states where things would be being investigated and not allowed to go forward because we would suspect that election fraud had occurred.
And if
Yeah.
if it was in a foreign country, our press would be all over it.
No, absolutely.
Only if we were against that government.
Right,
Yes,
right, right.
If we were against that.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
that's true.
My question is, so on the differences, that actually falls in your 0.3%, does it? All of those, most of those?
The plus or minus,
No, and the difference, you know, you said that they can change an election, that
Yeah.
in the voting machines, that they normally use a point
Yeah,
as a 3%.
right,
So that
yeah,
would
usually,
make it-
yeah, because the 3% means you're changing 6%
Yeah.
of the vote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the
they
most
fall in
I've ever suspected them doing was probably 88, but there were no exit polls. When there's not exit polls, sometimes you'll see them go double digits. But if there's actual exit polls, they like to stick around usually what is twice the margin of error.
Yeah, so therefore the last two, Alabama and Arizona, would be outside, it would be way outside.
Yeah, this is like,
That's right. Correct, you said.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And remember, take a moment to remember also Stephen Spoonemore saying, if the difference between the exit poll and the vote totals was over 2% in foreign elections, we would say something is wrong. All right? And then he talks about way off in American elections.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to ask about that Mississippi one, is 20%. That 20% there doesn't seem right at all.
Which one?
Mississippi. The probability of difference is 20.5%. I don't get that.
Fourth from the bottom.
That's Mississippi.
MS, down at the bottom.
MI.
Oh, okay.
Michigan, okay, Michigan.
Well, actually, this 20% isn't the difference. that's just a projection that in this case, even though the difference is going to Hillary somewhat, that's likely to occur 1 in 5 times, right? It's not, I mean, this is likely
Yeah.
to never occur, never occur, never occur, 99% of the time, never occur 99%. So that, the way Charnan wrote this is why I was trying to avoid having to do it. But that's a 1 in 5, just like that's really a 45, 46% occurrence. Those are believable occurrences. What aren't believable occurrences are a lot in this range. You're at the 97s.
Yeah.
It's an absurdness measure.
Yeah, and if you combine them on top of each other, you're getting about 1 in 8.3 billion that you would get, 10 out of 26. I mean, you're expecting 1, out of that 26.
In
Yeah.
exit polls, you rely upon the people to tell you the truth. If they're coming out and they feel somewhat intimidated, they might not tell you the truth. Is that possibly a reason?
No, I mean, there's tons of literature on this, right? It's called the reluctant responder, having suffered through this stuff. The only known liars were a lot of studies where somebody who's incredibly an outlier in their own area, for example, say you're voting communist in Waco, Texas, a real example. In the 1950s, you don't want an ass whooping. You're not gonna go to the exit poller and reveal, you don't trust it. But most of these, there's not a whole lot of data that, in fact, that started with Karl Rove, who said they're lying to their exit pollers. In fact, people just don't talk to you. But that doesn't matter because you're using a randomized system of voters coming out. So that's the same thing of someone not wanting to talk to you and pick up the phone. As long as you're still randomizing and you're representative in reflection of the demographics, that doesn't matter. So they're trying to come up, in fact, most people are proud of their vote. And think about what Rove came up with this. It's so absurd, I couldn't stand it. In Claremont, in Butler, and Warren County, where Bush got enough votes to win all of Ohio, in those 3 areas, he claimed that in the late afternoon, unbeknownst to everybody, Republican women rushed to the polls, and then hid from the exit poll, snuck out basement windows. They didn't do it in the morning or the afternoon, just prior to the election. The problem is I actually went down there and talked to people, investigative reporter, go, whoa, it must have been crazy busy here when you got that huge right now. It wasn't, they voted early. In fact, we got sign-in sheets. And can I see them? Yeah, sure. Right. When we said in Miami County is we don't believe it. We don't believe 679 out of 689 people voted. Oh yeah, 98.55%. And they voted overwhelmingly for Bush. Well, we took the sheet and said, that's interesting because you've only got 549 people signed in, even though you reported 679 voters. So, that's factored into the margin of error. So if some people lie, it usually comes within that 2% to 3%. And in fact, these polls, Charnan's polls here, he actually uses the cluster factor, where they add a 30% to expand the margin of error because the U.S. polls are so far off. They've actually expanded it and made it more difficult. But in the case of Bernie Sanders, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're getting some real obvious intervention here by somebody in the voting process.
It seems clear that exit polls can show fraud, they can legitimize elections if you look at it. But isn't it true there's no legal binding, any factor at all in terms of exit polls? And is the goal with this to get the media and the public to pay attention to the importance of exit polls? But is it still true that they're not legally binding in any way? And that's a step to make it legitimately binding.
Can I just add to that? if they are private companies, how are they ever good, if they're private exit polling companies, how are they not?
Well, the whole notion is they're private, but they're being run by state organizations. So if there's ongoing criminal activity, RICO, violating the public interest, if it's ongoing organized crime, then we have a right to see them. Now, either that, there's another option, I'd be the first. The universal laws of statistics may be suspended over the continental United States or our territories. That's a possibility I'm willing to investigate. The fact that our government says the universal laws of statistics only work in every other country in the world and don't apply here.
And one of the things, I studied exit polls because I work with Orient, one question I had was, when I looked to the guy who, the
comedian.
No, the one I looked at anyway was, I looked at exit polls, and one of the things I discovered is that exit polls in foreign countries only ask 1 or 2 questions, where exit polls here are asked up to 15 to 20 questions.
No, that's not true.
Well, there's an obsession with demographics
Yeah.
in our country.
But it's
But
not as many as-
what they leave out, the same company that monitors them for being stolen overseas, and I'm a former international election observer. You know, I co-wrote and edited the El Salvador after the revolution, when it was nasty. That was my report, and I reported out of the conflictive zone. And in that case, that's what you use, right? I mean, if you went online right now and put in exit polls, what will pop up is an unclassified document that how we were seeing how much Putin cheated by, and it wasn't that much compared to whoever's cheating for Hillary. It was like they were expecting him to get 59 and he was getting about 65%. So it looked like outside the margin of error about 3%. So yeah, here they do ask a lot of that because they want to tell you Hispanic voters, male versus female.
But not 50 questions.
Not 50, I think you said 15.
Oh, 15, oh, I didn't
Yeah,
hear you.
15.
The reason I bring this up is that in creating your exit poll strategy here, it seems to me that the less questions, the better.
I
the
agree.
better.
No, yeah.
Because people value their
Vote for
time.
president.
So I wanted to say, you might say, well, what is this all gonna do? I mean, we can't change voting machines right now. What is the exit poll gonna do? My view is it's gonna get people enrolled in trying to protect their democracy and understand it. And hopefully we'll get media coverage, and this is, I really wanna say that right now there's 15,000 pledged for the exit poll. If you start putting in your $27 or your $10 or whatever, we can push the number of places that are studied and add more reality. Now, if the...
And that'll actually lower the margin of error.
Right, and if the difference again shows up in this state between Bernie votes and Clinton votes, my belief is, first of all, I didn't mention to you that on Sunday, the Democratic Convention in Vermont put election integrity on their platform. So this is going to be discussed, all right? And if this exit poll, even if it's smaller, but hopefully we could get significant coverage, and we've got really good people that will train people to do this. We've been scrambling to get our team together. What will happen is if Bernie once again sees these big differences and the election integrity is on the platform, at least it's going to come out in strong tones, for the July convention, that this is not fair and has to be dealt with. That's all. So these are the differences that could happen.
Well, it's not democratic, right? Jimmy
Yeah,
Carter
not
told Der
democratic.
Spiegel the U.S. doesn't have a functioning democracy, right? And he doesn't watch elections here because we don't meet minimum criteria for transparency.
But in response to your question, the lawsuit does not end with exit polls. We are investigating, all the exit polls tell us is how many votes are being shifted. all right? And it tells us in which states they're being shifted and how many. We are also investigating the precincts to determine in what precincts were those votes shifted. And then once we've defined that, and we're well on our way to having that defined, we will then subpoena access to the ballots. And we will digitally photograph the ballots, the entire, not sample, the entire vote in that in the precincts where the shifting occurred. And they're in African American and Latino precincts in major cities, the larger African American and Latino precincts. That's where the shifting is going on so far. We will subpoena those ballots, we will digitally photograph them, and then we'll count them at our leisure. And that'll be all under court supervision.
That assumes we have paper ballots.
You're right. Now, where there's not, where there are lots of counties or precincts where there are paper ballots, and those are the ones we'll target. And once we prove that, in the case of where we don't have a paper trail, we'll say, well, you know, everywhere there's a paper trail, it shows that the exit poll was right. So we can extrapolate, you know, beyond.
You're gonna cheat, you cheat. There's more in the counties that don't have paper.
DREs.
The selection factor seems to be African American, predominantly African American Latino precincts and the large precincts in cities. So LA is the prime target.
Doesn't it depend on a judge through this legal action giving any credence to exit polls? Because I've seen the bias from Fox News. Well, it's biased. The questions are biased.
We have a strategy to get a good judge.
But there's no law that gives any legitimacy to exit polls. It's just a matter of how powerful
But
the argument
the
is.
official State Department policy, and there's numerous books written on this, through the AID, we recognize it as, the US State Department recognizes it as what drives our investigation of stolen elections. So, other than our government, I mean, there's no law in the 50 states that
Specifically
requires.
written, but some legitimacy in that respect.
Yeah.
I just want to I want to go back to 2004 for a quick minute because Cliff just triggered a memory of mine. So immediately after the votes were in, a national coalition was put together very quickly, like within a couple of days, which is how I first met Bob. And we were conferencing daily to try to expose that the 2004 election had been stolen. So two things came out of that. One, going back to earlier in the conversation, which is that no national media would touch this issue. None whatsoever. We had tremendous communications people who had volunteered their time, who totally had access to every major media outlet. No media outlet at all would pick up this story whatsoever until somebody here in the Bay Area, because of what we were doing to get Boxer to challenge the Ohio vote, finally did an interview with us, and that was an AP reporter from the San Jose Bureau. So that story, that was the only coverage of this issue. The second issue, which Cliff just triggered for me, was that as part of our effort to really figure out what had happened in 2004, we had this amazing forensic auditor. This woman was hired by the Fortune 500 repeatedly to audit anything that smelled wrong in their books. And she went down into New Mexico. Bob, I don't know if you remember this or not. She went down into New Mexico. She looked at precinct by precinct. She could pick out specific machines that had switched votes, especially on the Native American precincts. That's where the votes were flipped the most. Okay? And those are heavily Democratic precincts. So just as Bob just suggested that African American and Latino precincts are going to go heavily Democratic, the same issue. I'm sorry, Cliff.
Yeah, we need to end this.
Quickly, not only are they, of course, flipping the vote, in order to do that, they've got to strip people from the voting rolls. And these are all now done by private companies, increasingly with very dubious pasts, like Seidel, if you look, who's hooked up to everything from Booz Allen Hamilton. But there's a whole complex around the intelligence community that now helps us register people to vote, count the vote, and report the vote. And CITL will also monitor your internet to make sure people have positive, your social media that have positive social experiences. So, again, in order, Ohio isn't a battleground state. You know, if they hadn't had a war on drugs, a racist war on drugs, right? You know, we'd have a lot more blacks voting and it wouldn't be close. Florida, 7% of all black males are permanently disenfranchised in that state. It's not a battleground state. So they first strip in order to flip. So Harvey Wasserman and I have put together the greatest hits, you know, because a lot of times there's not a single fact. And I'm saying, you're right, there's not, but we got like 3,000 of them. So yeah, there's no one fact, but there sure is a lot of facts documented in the record. So these go into printing more copies of this. We're not taking any money out of it at all. So if you want to look at the greatest hits. And also we're saying that the Jim Crows also are bloody coups in the third world, right? Is that, you know, these used to be called by the CIA benign operations because they weren't bloody, nasty coup. They admitted before the church committee doing about 5,000 of these. And my theory is that which they used to do covertly abroad, they do overtly at home.
Yeah. Can't you have Amy Goodman do a story? I mean,
Amy's had Harvey and I on both a couple times.
Do you have the flicker?
Well, she got on KCBS here, and she really gave it to KCBS about how Bernie's been basically locked out of the mainstream media, and they couldn't shut her up. And they were like shocked, because KCBS is, you know, super mainstream, but.
I'd like to, I know we're getting very close to the end, and so I put our, this is our Institute website, and we are collecting money, and if you would press to the donate page now, Sam? Right there. Press donate, yeah, you'll see you can donate to the California exit poll. I don't know where is the lawsuit? It's further down, I guess. Is it? Okay.
We'll find it.
You're on the website.
Trustvote.org, yes.
There it is, okay? So you can donate, and then the other thing is if you have any cash on hand that you want to contribute, you can expand us to another extra precinct or two. And just right now, you can do it. You go into our heart bowl, because it has your heart in mind. And then so there's some money for both of this already, but we need, you know, a lot more to make a difference. And just a quick note on this. In 2012, we didn't discuss what we did very much, but right here, this was the headquarters of CITL in the United States, a suburban home. And when they found that we took a picture of them, they ran to create a little office in Baltimore.
Well, they're a foreign company from Barcelona,
Right.
Spain. And when we said, why are you who are hooked up with the CIA? And, you know, they literally work with the nonprofit of the CIA to develop technology. They said, well, we'll be counting it out of our American headquarters.
And
So we sent people to their house, which was a residence in Virginia, not that far from Langley.
And I was the one who helped sponsor this map creation. But
help
over
sponsor
here,
it.
this is now what we have CITL now, okay? And we have a lot more connections where they can, you know, investigate us through the NSA, through the CIA over here.
Carrier IQ, right? So CITL, here's their part owners, but they own Carrier IQ through NADA, which is a key investigator. That's the third-party app on your phone that spies on you.
You can set turn on your
that turns
phone.
on your phone, listens and watch you. That's
And then
Carrier
Booz
IQ.
Allen
So
Hamilton
they
is a
own
large
that.
legal firm that Snowden used to work for, and he, you know, grew very dismayed with what he discovered was
And one of the
spying on
highlights
American people.
is that you can see that the key guy who's the CEO of CITL also worked on the board of Titan, which is known for Titan and Khaki. Those of you saw a Rock for Sale, right? The ones that tortured people. Yeah, that's that Titan El Salvador.
So this is why we really need to
That's who's
take our
counting our
democracy into our hands, okay? I mean, and basically, there's no democracy here that Bernie Sanders would like. These guys are making a fortune, okay?
36
And some of them
states-
are in Barcelona, so you can't catch them too.
36 states, they have direct access to the tabulators on the overseas votes, because you can trust them, right? They've got a lot of military experience.
And I want you to know that the states that were controlled by SITL and SOE that had problems was Arizona, Kentucky, and New York. Controlled everything, okay? And they had election night reporting that supposedly tells you what the votes are. And then there's many other states where they do election night reporting, and they do it in California, in Santa Clara, Contra Costa, Shasta County, and Ventura County, and they're seeking to penetrate elsewhere. And they have a cooperative relationship with ES&S that runs a lot of voting machines in the state, and then Hardinger Civic that also works together with ES&S is the one that handles Orange County that's extensively electronic voting machines with no paper ballot. So yes, it is a challenging situation in California, but you can make a difference, I promise you.